Hello and welcome to the analysis of the Hindu newspaper dated January 18th, 2023. In this video, we are going to talk about the important newspaper articles which were present in the Hindu newspaper. So do watch this video till the end because these articles are going to be very important for the understanding regarding the current issues. So let's start with the first important newspaper article. Now, this particular newspaper article was present in page 1 and it talks about the relations between Pakistan and India, right? And this article becomes important because India and its neighborhood relations find a mention in the GS paper 2 syllabus. So let's first understand the context and then we will understand the India-Pakistan relations. So Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has called for a serious and sincere talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on burning points like Kashmir. Because India and Kashmir share border in the Kashmir area, and that is why the tensions are there all the time, and that is why the Pakistan Prime Minister has called for sincere and serious talks. Now, this particular instance was mentioned, or this particular statement was said by Shehbaz Sharif in an interview with Dubai-based Al Arabiya TV that was aired on Monday, and Mr. Sharif said Pakistan had learned its lesson after 3 wars with India and stressed that now it wanted peace with its neighbor. But what happened is that after some period of time, he changed his statement, and the Pakistan Prime Minister's office said that in a series of tweets, and it clarified that Mr. Sharif had made it clear that talks with India would be possible only after New Delhi reversed the revocation of Article 370 that granted special status to Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this U-turn is not new to Pakistan because it has been doing this since the dawn of time, right? So now Pakistan is battling a severe economic crisis and public discontent due to the shortage of flour and fuel, and there are other issues as well. For example, the rising instances of terror attacks by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which has ended a ceasefire with the country's security forces late last year. So the country of Pakistan is facing economic crisis as well as the political crisis. So it's under the civil war at this particular point of time. So the situation is very worse off. And in this situation, talking about resolving the issues like Kashmir issue is something which is very, very stupid, right? So now this kind of things happen over and over again, but what's important is to understand the India-Pakistan relations and how India deals with the Pakistan. Now, India has followed a consistent and principled policy towards Pakistan that is in keeping with its neighborhood first policy. It will at all cost, it will all at all cost save the neighborhood, talk about the neighborhood. It will maintain the relations with the neighborhood because you are our neighbor. That is why we will maintain good relations with you. But India seeks normal neighborly relations with Pakistan in an environment free from terror, hostility, and violence. And India is also committed to address issues. But we are going to keep in mind the Shimla Agreement as well as the Lahore Declaration. Right? And India will also not compromise on issues related to its national security and take firm and decisive measures to deal with all attempts to undermine India's security and territorial integrity. It has done through the Balakot strikes, it has done through all of the things year on year basis, right? So this is what the India and Pakistan relations look like. From the trade perspective, it's very interesting because India does not do a lot of trade, but at the same time, it does some kind of trade. So the trade balance in 2018-2019, this data is of 2018 to 2019, it's US dollar $1.57 billion, right? But now this has changed. We do not have the present data at this particular point of time. This is the data which was present in the MEA website, that is Ministry of External Affairs website. We do not know about the trade balance at this particular point of time. Now, the most favored nation status of the of the Pakistan has been withdrawn in the 2019, but for now, we do not know about the trade balance between these two countries, but in 2018 to 2019, US dollar $1.57 billion, right? US $1.57 billion of United States was the trade between the two countries, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. India and Pakistan relations obviously are very, very important. That is why we have discussed the India and Pakistan relations and what is the stand of India on the India and Pakistan relations, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. Let's now head to the next important newspaper article. Now, this particular newspaper article is very interesting because the United Nations Sanctions Committee, that is 1267, has sanctioned Abdul Rahman Makki of Pakistan as a as a terrorist, right? And the Lashkar-e-Taiba unit has been deemed as a terror outfit. Now, who is Abdul Rahman Makki? He was basically born in Bhawalpur, Punjab province of Pakistan. His nationality is Pakistan. He is the deputy chief of Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jamaat-ud-Dawa, and head of the political affairs wing of the Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Lashkar-e-Taiba. Now, he's also served as the head of the Lashkar-e-Taiba's foreign relations department and a member of the Shura governing body, which is its governing body, and he is also the brother-in-law of Jamaat Uddawa and Lashkar-e-Taiba chief Hafiz Mohammad Saeed, right? So now this particular sanctions become very important because China at this particular point of time in the United Nations Security Council has taken the stand that it wants to name Lashkar's Makki as a terrorist. Now, how this happened, we'll talk about it, and we'll also talk about the United Nations Security Council. We are also going to talk about the 1267 Sanctions Committee. Now, this particular article becomes important for the GS paper 2, that is important in international institutions, agencies, fora, their structure and mandate. We are going to understand this particular important international institution, that is United Nations Security Council. But first, let's understand the context of it and the major pointers in this particular newspaper article. Then we will discuss the United Nations Security Council. Now, ISIL and Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee of the United Nations Security Council has placed Abdul Rahman Makki, a fundraiser and key planner of the Pakistan-based terror outfit Lashkar-e-Taiba, on its sanctions list. Now, the move was made possible after China withdrew the technical hold that it had postponed last June, right? So, last June in 2022, China had withdrawn the technical. Now, there was a technical hold on that particular decision to deem him as a terrorist, but now they have withdrawn that particular technical hold. Now, the United States and the India, which was the non-permanent member in 2022. Now it is not the non-permanent member. It's a session at the United Nations Security Council has ended. Now that at that particular point of time, last June, they had tried unsuccessfully to get Makki on the global terror blacklist, but that did not happen. But now Beijing has now argued that the blacklisting is in fact a recognition of Pakistan's record of fighting terrorism, because China always favors the Pakistan, because China needs Pakistan, and that is why it has said that it is an instance of Pakistan's record of fighting terrorism. This is the stand that Beijing has maintained, the stand that China has maintained. Now, Abdul Rahman Makki and other Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jamaat-ud-Dawa operatives have been involved in raising funds, recruiting and radicalizing youth to violence and planning attacks in India, particularly in the Jammu and Kashmir, and that is why this particular blacklisting of Makki has been a very good step. Now, Jamaat-ud-Dawa is the parent body of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, because, and that is why he is basically what? He is basically the deputy chief of Lashkar-e-Taiba as well as the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, because Jamaat-ud-Dawa is a parent body of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. Jamaat-ud-Dawa, then comes the Lashkar-e-Taiba, right? Now, during India's 2-year tenure at the UNSC, which happened in 2021 and 2022, New Delhi put forth 5 names for the designation under the sanctions committee. That is Abdul Rahman Makki from the Lashkar-e-Taiba, Abdul Rauf Asgar from Jaish-e-Mohammed, Sajid Mir was also placed in the UNSC sanctions list, and Shahid Mahmood and Talha Sayyed, all who belonged to the Lashkar-e-Taiba, were said, or according to the New Delhi, they were the terrorists and they should be put in the put under the black listing. But that didn't happen at that particular point of time. But now the Lashkar-e-Taiba deputy chief has been placed under the black list, right? So now all 5 faced a technical hold from China, while the other 14 members of the United Nations Security Council supported the listing. Now the technical hold of this particular person, that is Makki, Deputy Chief of Lashkar-e-Taiba, has been withdrawn, but the technical hold on the other 4 faces of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, they have been under the technical hold from China. We do not know when this particular technical hold will be withdrawn from the China, and as and when the technical hold from the China ends, all of the other 4 members of the Lashkar-e-Taiba will also be put under the United Nations Security Council blacklist, right? So now what exactly is the United Nations Security Council? Basically, United Nations Security Council is a prime principal organ of the United Nations. It is one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations. It was established by the UN Charter in 1945. Now, its primary responsibility or principal responsibility is to work to maintain international peace and security, and the council is headquartered at New York, right? So its headquarters are at New York, and apart from it, it has 15 members in total. 5 of them are permanent members who hold the seat on a permanent basis, and we have 10 non-permanent members who are elected for 2 years. Now this particular election happens every year. Every year 5 non-permanent members come into the United Nations Security Council and 5 non-permanent members go out of it, right? So now the 5 permanent members are United Nations, United States, Russian Federation, France, China, and United Kingdom. They hold the veto power, and they are on a permanent basis in the United Nations Security Council. Now the presidency of the United Nations Security Council rotates every month among its 15 members, right? So now if we talk about the voting power, then each member of the United Nations Security Council has 1 vote, and any decision is made on an affirmative vote, right? Every member, if it says yes, then that particular resolution is going to get passed. But if any of the 5 permanent members say no, then that particular resolution is going to not get passed. In order for a resolution to get passed, 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council are going to say yes, and apart from it 4 non-permanent members are going to say yes. So in total 9 votes you need for a resolution to get passed, and all of the 5 members are going to be permanent members, right? And any member of the United Nations which is not a member of the United Nations Security Council may participate without a vote in the discussion of any question brought before the United Nations Security Council whenever the latter considers that the interests of that member are especially affected. So India, which does not hold a non-permanent member seat at this particular point of time, can participate in all the functioning of the United Nations Security Council, but it cannot vote there, right? So this is about the voting power. Let's not talk about the issues with the United Nations Security Council, because there are many issues, and here we are going to discuss only 4 issues that are there with the United Nations Security Council. So the first one is the absence of the records and the text of the meetings, because these are very highly classified information, and that is why there is an absence of records and text meetings. Though it is a very good strategy to keep out all of the important information, to keep up the information with themselves, but it also poses some kind of problem. So the usual UN rules don't apply to the United Nations Security Council deliberations, and no records are kept of its meetings, and additionally there is no text of the meeting to discuss, amend, or object. This makes it very highly opaque, right? It is not a very transparent body, and that is why all of the other problems also comes with it. So there is a power play in the United Nations Security Council, and the veto powers that the United Nations Security Council's 5 permanent members enjoy is an anachronism in this age. And the United Nations Security Council in its current form has become a constraint in understanding the international changes and dynamics in the area of human security and peace, because there is a power play in the United Nations Security Council, and all of the members work in their own interest, right? At the end of the day, now there are basically divisions among the P5 as well. There is a depolarization within the United Nations members, so decisions are either not taken or not heeded, and frequent divisions with the United Nations Security Council P5 end up blocking key decisions. For example, with the coronavirus pandemic emergence, the United Nations Security Council, and the World Health Organization failed to play an effective role in helping the nations deal with the spread because they could not deal with their own politics. And that is what posed the problem. So the fourth issue here, we have the underrepresentation, because countries like India, Germany, Brazil and South Africa, which are basically economically very capable, are not part of the United Nations Security Council. This is also a very big problem. Now that we have talked about the issues with the UNSC, we need to talk about the 1267 sanctions committee as well, because we have talked about in this particular newspaper article about this particular committee, right? So now UNSC, that is United Nations Security Council 1267 committee was basically set up in 1999, and it was strengthened after September 2001 attacks. It is now known as Daesh and Al Qaeda Sanctions Committee. Now it comprises all permanent and non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. That is 15 members of the United Nations Security Council are part of the UNSC 1267 committee. Now, the 1267 list of terrorists is a global list with the UNSC stamp, and it is full of Pakistani nationals and residents, right? Now, it is one of the most important and active United Nations subsidiary bodies working on efforts to combat terrorism, particularly in relation to Al Qaeda and Islamic State group. Now, it discusses UN efforts to limit the movement of terrorists, especially those related to travel bans, the freezing of assets, and arms embargo for the terrorism. In this is what is the function of the UNSC 1267 committee, right? Now it has a particular procedure in which it lists the all of the individuals as the terrorist. Now any member state can submit a proposal for listing an individual, group or entity, and in this case, of the 5 terrorists, the listing was made by India, or proposal was sent by India to name these particular persons as the terrorist. Now the proposal must include acts or activities indicating the proposed individual group had participating in the financing, planning, facilitating, preparing or perpetrating of acts or activities linked to the ISIL, Daesh, Al Qaeda or any cell, affiliate, splinter group or derivative thereof. And decisions on listing and delisting are adopted by consensus, and the proposal is sent to all the members, and if no member objects within 5 working days, the proposal is adopted. And in this case, the China withheld its a vote on this particular issue, and there was a technical hold, and that is why the resolution could not be passed in the 5 days. Now an objection means curtains for the proposals, right? And any member of the committee may also put technical hold. In this case of Makki, we have seen the technical hold from the China, and they put a technical hold on the proposal and asked for more information from the proposing member state. Now during this time, other members may also place their own holds, and the matter remains on the pending list of the committee until such time as the member state that has placed the hold decides to turn its decision into objection, and or until all those have placed holds remove them within a time frame laid down by the committee. Now pending issues must be resolved in the 6 months, which happened in this case. Now after the 6 months, now Makki, who is basically the deputy chief of Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jamaat-ud-Dawa, has been or is under the blacklisting from the 1267 committee. Now this particular hold could also be extended for the additional 3 months, and at the end of this period, if an objection is not placed, the matter is considered approved, right? But in this case, only in the 6 months, what happened is that he was deemed as a global terrorist, right? So this is the particular procedure of the listing of any other person or entity as a global terrorist, or any other entity as a global terrorist organization, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. Let's now head to the next important newspaper article. Now this particular newspaper article was present on page 1 itself, and it is regarding the IMF and the Sri Lanka's asking of loan from the IMF, right? So this becomes important for understanding the IMF, and we also need to understand the India and Sri Lanka relations, right? So now India, this particular article is important for India and its neighborhood relations and important international institution, and these all two topics are part of the GS paper 2, and that is why these are very, very important for us. Now let's first understand the context of this particular newspaper article, then we will understand the major pointers in this particular newspaper article, and then we will understand what is IMF, that is the International Monetary Fund. Now India sent financial assurances to the IMF on the Monday, becoming the first of the international Sri Lanka's creditors to officially back the crisis hit island nation's debt restructuring program. Last year we have seen what? Economic crisis in Sri Lanka. The food prices shot very high, and that is why the Sri Lanka was placed under the economic crisis, right? And now Sri Lanka needs creditors, and it also needs people to back it. Now in this case, the countries, it needs countries to back it up. Now India, Japan and China, if they back up the Sri Lanka's loans, or they give assurances that in case Sri Lanka does not pay, then they will somehow manage it, then uh, then basically then the IMF will give them loans. Until then Sri Lanka is not going to get loans, and that is why India has basically given financial assurances to the IMF. Now this takes Sri Lanka one step closer to getting a crucial $2.9 billion package from the IMF, made contingent on receiving financial assurances from Sri Lanka's official creditors and making a good faith effort to reach a collaborative agreement with the private creditors. And China, Japan and India are Sri Lanka's three bilateral lenders, and with India getting on board, Sri Lanka's chances of swiftly tapping IMF assistance now depend on similar assurances from the Japan and China. Now Sri Lanka can get the the assurances from Japan, but it's very hard to get the assurances from the China. Because why Japan? Now sources familiar with the Sri Lanka's ongoing negotiations with creditors said that the Paris Club, of which Japan is a member, is likely to send its financial assurances soon, but in the case of China it's a totally different story. However, as China's negotiations with the creditors dragged on, Chinese loans came under the spotlight, drawing criticism from both local politicians and the international actors. Now, in a parliamentary intervention, a prominent opposition legislature squarely blamed China for the delay. Now, according to them, China has played as a player which worked in their own interest. China worked in its own interest, and basically uh, it led to Sri Lanka getting into a debt trap. And now the legislators of Sri Lanka do not want the China's involvement anytime soon, and that is why it becomes a very big problem for the getting assurances from China. And there's more drama to it. So more recently, the UN ambassador to Colombo in a media interview asked China not to be the spoiler in Sri Lanka's debt restructuring process. Now the Chinese embassy also responded on Tuesday, and it accused the US official of hypocrisy in a statement that pointed to private creditors from the Western countries who hold about 40% of the Sri Lanka's debt. Now Sri Lanka needs a debt at any cost from the IMF or financial assistance from the IMF, and that is why it needs to get China on board as well, right? So this is basically this particular newspaper article. Now let's talk about the IMF, which is basically International Monetary Fund. It is an organization of 190 members, and each of which has a representation of the IMF's executive board in the proportion to its financial importance. So it's basically if you have a lot of money, you are going to get better representation. If you don't have a lot of money, you are not. If you have low money, if you have no money, you are going to get very less importance in the IMF, right? So now these are basically the objectives of the financial IMF, which are basically fosters a global monetary cooperation, it secures financial stability, it facilitates international trade, it promotes high employment and suitable economic growth, and it also reduces poverty around the world. It is also responsible for the macroeconomic growth. It is also responsible for the policy advices and financing for the developing countries, and it also talks about the promotion of exchange rate stability, and then it is also an international payment system, right? So these are basically the objectives of the IMF. Let's now talk about what IMF basically does. So there are basically three critical missions of the IMF. First mission is to further international monetary cooperation, encouraging the expansion of the trade and economic growth. It also discourages policies that would harm prosperity. And the third basically mission of the IMF is to fulfill these missions, and IMF member countries work collaboratively with each other and with other international bodies to ensure more financial stability, right? So these are basically the missions of the IMF. Let's now talk about the functions of the IMF. So the first function is to provide financial assistance. In this case, it is going to provide the financial assistance to Sri Lanka. And this is basically the first function of the IMF. The second function is the surveillance. So it oversees the international monetary system and monitors the economic and financial policies of its 190 member countries, and it also produces some of the reports which are very beneficial in order to monitor the financial policies or economic policies of these particular countries. Apart from it, it also develops the capacity regarding what technical assistance and training to central banks, finance ministers, tax authorities, and other economic institutions. So it basically helps countries raise public revenues, modernize banking systems, and develop strong legal frameworks, improve governance, and it also enhances reporting of macroeconomic and financial data. And the second basic function regarding the capacity development is to develop or make progress towards the sustainable development goals. So these are basically the functions of the IMF, which are three in number. First one is it provides the financial assistance. Second one is that it is responsible for the surveillance regarding the international monetary system, and the third one is that it builds capacity in order to realize the monetary goals, right? So these are basically the functions of the IMF. We have talked about the International Monetary Fund in detail. We have also talked about what was written in this particular newspaper article regarding the Sri Lanka and India. So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article, and this is it for the day. Thank you from my side. Do like and share the video and subscribe to this channel. Have a good day. Bye.